Yeah, well, if any of you guys are regulars at these events, I'm sure you'll notice we've got a bit of an upsurge in attendees tonight. And I'm sure that's because of the calibre of speaker we've got, Leonie Freeman, and I'm sure we're in for a great, thought-provoking message. And if you don't know Leonie, how would I describe her? She's an advocate, an advisor, a strategist, a thought leader on all aspects pertaining to housing, and particularly what we're looking at tonight, what has been dubbed the Auckland housing crisis. And perhaps most importantly, she has a direct line to the people of influence, those that are making the decisions. I'd say she's been working in the trenches with us for many years, and now the advocacy work that she is doing intersects with what many of us are doing in our businesses from day to day. And I know one of her consistent messages is that we all must understand the end game and move out of our historic silos as we work together towards a shared goal. So that's probably enough of an introduction from me. I'll hand you over to Leonie. Thank you.
Thanks. Cheers. Well, good afternoon and great to be here. So here's where we're at, and it's not a pretty picture. In 2017, Auckland was the fourth most unaffordable city in the world in which to buy a house. The unitary plan put together by Auckland Council identified that we needed to build 14,000 houses every single year for the next 30 years. To December last year, we built just under 8,000. And then what's worse is that many of our key workers, our teachers, our nurses, our police, are leaving the city because that's the only way that they think they can get onto the housing ladder. And for those people struggling to buy their first house, they continue to see the goalposts keep moving. And what amazes me is despite all the focus that we've had on property for the last decade, we still do not have a comprehensive solution that we can all get in behind and support. To give you some context, Einstein said that we can't solve problems by using the same kind of thinking that we used when we created them. And our housing crisis is neither new nor simple. There is no one single idea, one single person, or one single organisation that can solve our housing issues. And we need to ditch the fantasy that there is some simple silver bullet solution that is going to solve it all. The reality is, if Auckland wants to solve its housing crisis, then it's up to all Aucklanders to get in behind and solve it. Now, many people have been aware that I've spent some time as my contribution to the city to try and do something about solving the housing crisis. And one of the great quotes that speaks to me is Margaret Mead. And she says, "Never believe that a few caring people can't change the world, for indeed that's all who ever have." One of the things that people aren't so aware of with the work that I've been doing is one of the key reasons behind it. And I thought tonight, I don't usually share the story, but I thought tonight I would share the story. And the story starts back in 1962, and this is a photo of my parents. And my parents were both teachers, and neither of them came from any family money. Dad came from Langholm, and my mother came from the boondocks out of Gisborne. And this is just before they got married, and they were able to scrape together £500 as their deposit to buy their house. They were able to get a state advances loan from the government, and they borrowed the money to buy the land from their insurance company. They got a house in Konini Road in Titirangi, and yep, this is what they got when it was finished. So you've got a 3-bedroom house, 1 bathroom, quarter-acre section. No landscaping, no driveway, no car parking, no carport, no garage, no carpet, no curtains, and no insulation. So I'm certainly not advocating that that is the standard that we build to today. But the key thing about it is that as teachers, they were able to buy a house, put down roots, and be part of a community. 3 kids came along, and yes, I'll flick over this one quick because I'm the one on the right-hand side. But it meant that we were part of a community, and my dad taught at Titirangi Primary and my mum at Kelston School for the Deaf. Just to close that story, this is the house today. It's now in a much smaller section and it's been expanded about 3 times. And this is a more recent photo of my parents. But the key issue to me with this whole story is that when I look at a family like my parents today, 2 teachers and 3 kids, it's very unlikely that they would ever be able to buy a house in Auckland. Now, I think there's something fundamentally wrong in our city when key workers such as teachers and others have given up hope of ever being able to buy a house. And a recent survey by the Teachers Association indicated that almost 80% of new teachers in Auckland have given up any hope of getting on the property ladder in Auckland City. So there's something wrong with this. So I had to ask myself the question, what was I personally prepared to do? It's easy to look to somebody else and think that they should solve it. And so this is part of my contribution to solving the housing crisis, given the background that I've got. So I also ask you all the same question. What will you do to solve this critical issue for our city? Now, at this point, I'm sure some of you are thinking, man, Leonie, you might just be a little bit crazy, thinking that we could actually solve this crisis. And that's okay. I've had that comment quite a few times in the last 18 months or so. And just before you tell me to start taking some blue pills, I just want to share with you a story about a time in the past when people told me that I was completely crazy before. So I just want to take you on a little journey before I share the solution around the housing and where we're up to today. So let me transport you back to 1995. And let's just paint a pictorial picture of the technology of the time, just to set the scene. Yahoo was the main search engine of the day, because Google hadn't yet been launched. This was the standard computer, for those that remember, all 20 megabytes of it. And in those days, if you wanted access to the internet, you had to dial up using a router such as this. And remember, you couldn't talk on the telephone and be on the internet at the same time. And who could forget these? Coin the brick, these were the days of mobile phones when bigger was definitely better. And in 1995, if you wanted to find a house to buy or rent, the process that you went through was really frustrating, laborious, and time-consuming. Each week you'd go along and you'd pick up a big stack of property magazines, and some of them were so thick that you struggled to fold them in half. And then if you thought that they were going to be organised in any logical manner, like sorted by price or suburb, you were sadly mistaken, because they were sorted by real estate agent. And you used to have to go through page after page after page, just to see if anything even remotely fitted the criteria of what you were looking for. So it was against this backdrop that I'd come up with an idea of creating a New Zealand-wide website with all the properties for sale and for rent in one place. And they'd come complete with photos and lots of information. And they'd be easily searchable and accessible by anyone, anywhere, at any time. A real no-brainer, right? So I got really excited about this idea and I started sharing it with key people in the real estate industry. For 5 months, they told me I was crazy, I got laughed at, and I got ignored. And even some supposedly wise heads said to me, Leonie, nobody will ever buy property this way. Now, I couldn't understand why they didn't see the disruption that was about to engulf the real estate industry, because it seemed so obvious to me. But day after day, week after week, month after month, I persevered on this journey. But in 1995, I'd come to the decision, and the decision was that if nothing happened at the next meeting the next day, I was going to give up on this idea and move on. And the next meeting was in Christchurch with a guy called Peter Cook. And Peter was a past president of the Real Estate Institute, a well-respected realtor, and somebody I knew well. And he got it. Hallelujah. And he not only got the concept of what I was talking about, but he became an influential advocate. And within 12 months of that meeting, we had launched one of the first major commercial websites in New Zealand in August 1996. I was responsible for the launch of realends.co.nz, which is today known as realestate.co.nz. Now, I just have to point out that when I look at that screen today, I do cringe a little bit, if I'm honest. But I wanted to tell you that in the day, we thought that was super cool. And just to give you a bit of context, we used to say to the agents, fax us a listing form and post us a photo. Now, realestate.co.nz today is New Zealand's #1 property site. Last year it had over 9.1 million users and more than 258,000 listings. Now, the reason I share that story today is that when you look at realestate.co.nz today, you couldn't imagine buying property or looking for property in any other way but on the internet. But as I explained back in 1995, people thought I was completely crazy. And so I ask you to put the same lens on it when we look at how we can solve the housing crisis. Because I've got no doubt that if we put the solution in place today, then in another 10 years we'll look back to today and it will seem just as obvious a decision as the realestate.co one is today. So let me share my solution. And this is a solution that can be applied anywhere around the country, but I've focused on Auckland because this is where we live. And I see the solution in an initiative called Collective Impact. And very simply, Collective Impact is a structured framework that has been used extensively all around the world to solve big, complex, seemingly intractable social problems. The idea behind it is to bring all the different siloed groups, government, council, iwi, private sector developers, infrastructure, community housing, the finance community, and everybody else together, focused on some common goals. It has some common principles about shared accountability for the results, but having differentiated responsibility. It's about bringing everyone together and working as true partners to solve the problem. It's about a really structured framework and making everything transparent, evidence-based, measuring everything. In simple fact, it's a bit like the Three Musketeers, all for one and one for all. Now, an example of a great success story here in New Zealand of a collective impact initiative is the People's Project in Hamilton. Now, some of you may be aware of it, but in 2014, the Chief Executive, Julie Nelson of the WISE Group, led an initiative, and their basic premise in Hamilton was to say, we no longer want to manage homelessness in central Hamilton. We want to end it. And so they set up a collective impact initiative and brought all the parties, the government agencies, the church groups, the charities, the council, the business community together, with the goal of ending rough sleeping in Hamilton by the end of 2016. Now, in those few years, they worked with almost 800 different people and found solutions for all of them, so that by the end of 2016 in Hamilton, they ended rough sleeping. The focus now is on preventing that situation. Now, that program has been expanded last year into Auckland, Tauranga, Wellington and Christchurch. And you may have seen last Friday the announcement from government about a $100 million allocation towards homelessness. And a third of that money is being allocated to short-term solutions. But about 67 million of that money is being allocated to this Housing First Collective Impact Initiative to expand what's already been done. So we know it works, and it works here. If we look internationally, there's huge numbers of applications of this. In Brandon, which is a Canadian city, they used a collective impact initiative to create people who were periodic or perennial renters to be able to buy their own house. In Chicago, they did a collective impact initiative which created 6,000 jobs for people on the dole in the time of recession. The 100,000 Homes campaign in America was focused on ending homelessness in over 78 cities in America. And GAIN was about improving nutrition for over 530 million people globally. So this initiative, these frameworks work. And I see it as the opportunity to put in to Auckland to help us bring together all the different siloed groups focused on an outcome. So there's 4 steps. The first one is about the vision. The thing that I look at the moment is despite all the time we spent on housing and all the focus on the problems, we still do not have a vision for our city that we can all get in behind and support. You think about setting some goals, and you take our Olympic rowing. If they want to win a gold medal, they've got to know where they're aiming for, the final line. They've got a coxswain at the front who's yelling instructions and making sure everybody's in line. And then you've got all the rowers doing what they should, all in unison. Now you look at that for our housing at the moment. We don't have a finish line that we're all focused on. We don't have a coxswain at the front who's providing direction and keeping us all in line. We got everybody on the boat, government, council, iwi, private sector, developers, and so on, but we're not pulling in unison. And we know what happens if we don't pull in unison, the boat sinks. So what I've done as part of the work on my website with this initiative is I said, right, well, let's just start with a straw man vision for the city. And I'm not saying this is the one, but it's a starting point for discussion. So at the centre of the vision to me is that housing is at the heart of strengthening and connecting communities in Auckland. Because this isn't just about more houses, it's strengthening and building communities. And then I identified 6 activity areas. So if you start on the right-hand side, the first one is housing supply. And I've suggested 14,000 houses a year, the Auckland Council target, half of which are affordable. Home ownership, a level of 65% in Auckland, including Māori and Pacific Islanders. Existing housing quality, some sort of measure to make sure that, for example, say 95% of our houses are warm, safe and dry. Social housing, the target in 2016 was to complete 3,000 social housing places by the end of 2018. Homelessness, end homelessness in Auckland. And strengthening communities was about rental tenure security and also making sure that we take everybody on the journey. So that was the straw man vision. Step 2 is about structure, because the question then becomes, if we create a vision that we get in behind, the question then is, how do we get there? And when you look at these collective impact initiatives all around the world, what they typically do is have 2 things. There's a governance structure at the top of senior city leaders, which represent every sector group involved. And then what they do is they create a small, typically non-for-profit entity, and in the case of Auckland, it would be no more than 10 people whose sole role is to coordinate all the aspects of what's going on in housing, provide the ability to bring all the parties together, create the overview of planning, accountability, KPIs, and reporting. It gives them a place to bring people together. Because at the moment, we've got all the silos, and everybody's working really hard. There's some fantastic things going on. But we all know, every single one of us, it doesn't matter what you're doing, there are a lot of blockages. And it's really difficult to find any way to be able to unblock those. With a collective impact initiative, you create what I call Housing Connect at the centre. And it's not in control, because nobody's in control, but it creates the ability to sort out the blockages, to hold each other to account, to have a forum to deal with the problems, and focus solely on solving the problem. Step 3 was about a housing framework, because we all know housing's quite complicated. And often we see people trying to say, look, it's immigration or it's land supply, but it's so much more complex than that. And I liken it a bit to a Rubik's Cube. So one of the things we've done on the website, and I won't go through it today, is we created a housing framework. And this is interactive and there's a lot more detail in behind it. But the purpose was for anybody to be able to have a look and understand where all the bits of housing fit in to the overall framework, because there's a lot of it and it's quite complex. And the final step around a collective impact solution is an action plan. And this is about creating a 10-year plan for the city, not 3-year plans driven by political cycles. This is about sharing all the information and holding each other accountable, having targets and milestones and regular reporting so we all know what's going on, And more than that, that we share it with Aucklanders so we take them on the journey. It's about transparency and about accountability. So we launched this initiative in October 2016. And I just thought I'd share a bit of the journey about where we've been. Because it's been very much the same journey I went on the Relian story back in 1995. So we've had a lot of support for this initiative from a range of different sector groups, particularly on the delivery side, developers, community housing groups, Infrastructure New Zealand, and so on. We had a lot of support from Auckland Council at the time, particularly the previous Deputy Mayor, Penny Hulse. Unfortunately, when the new Mayor came in, he chose not to support it. And we'd shared this initiative with all the 3 ministers and the 4 government agencies at the time, but we didn't actually even get a response. So then what we did was we thought, okay, well, we'll just keep talking about this. And more people started to get in behind, and we built a bit of momentum. And so last August, we decided to do an example of collective impact in action, and we held a housing summit on the 1st of August. And we brought over 130 people from every sector group together, focused on fixing the issues. The goal that came out of that, from that day, I just thought I'd share it, because this was the vision from the Housing Summit, which really replaces my original one, was our goal is to create a future in which all players in the housing industry work together to ensure every Aucklander, every New Zealander, across all sectors of the community, has adequate, decent and affordable housing. After the Housing Summit, the Council came back to us and said, hey, Leonie, we'd like to work with you. And so the Deputy Mayor, Bill Cashmore, and I had quite a number of meetings, which were really positive. We had a change in government, and I'd been talking about this with Phil Twyford. So again, to try and create a bit more momentum, myself and a team around me organised the Auckland Housing Collective Action Forum in February. And for the first time ever, we got every sector group. So we had the Minister, the Deputy Mayor, we had representatives from every property sector, and the whole sole point of discussion at this forum was how do we work together going forward? We put up 3 options. One was one of the sector groups could lead. The second one was it could be a more casual relationship, or the third one was a collective impact initiative that I've talked about tonight. And on the night, we got agreement to set up a working group. It was hugely positive, and I felt like actually we might have just cracked it. And somebody on the night said to me, Leonie, this is the most hope we've ever had that we might actually be able to sort out some of the problems. So I thought, this is great. Sadly, 3 days later, the council withdrew, and I don't know why. And then 3 weeks after that, the Mayor announced that he wants to lead the coordination of all the housing. And that would be great. And I've said publicly, look, we'll get him behind him. But what we have to see is an absolute, resolute and uncompromising focus on delivery, results and outcomes. Now, I've spent the last 2 months trying to find out actually who's responsible in council for dealing with it, and I haven't had much information yet. So I'm hoping and praying that the Mayor is genuine about the announcements that he's made and that we will actually see it. Now, this sort of journey is always a roller coaster ride when you're trying to create change, because the disruption we're talking about to solve the housing crisis is not just about new technology or new materials or new innovations. We need all of those. But the key disruption here, and I'm sure you've all had examples of it, is about finding a way that we can all work together and trust each other and make sure that what's being said will actually happen. And I look at some of the initiatives going on at the moment, and our new minister has set some really bold and brave targets. Kiwi Build is one of those. The media often ask me, Leonie, what do you think about that? Come on, is it realistic? And I say something to them every single time. I say, these are really big and brave and bold targets, and this is what we need. The question is not to ask, will we do it? I said the question we must ask is, how do we do it? Because we must. But we need to make sure that there isn't a big disconnection between what the politicians are saying in both government and council and what's happening in reality. We need to see the housing plan. We need to see reporting, not just big aspirational targets of what's being talked about. We actually need to see, right, what's happening now? What's coming through the pipeline? And are we on target? Because again, even if we look at Kiwi Build, the target in Auckland is 5,000 houses, and that would be fantastic if we could get to that, 5,000 affordable houses. But remember, the council's target is 14,000, so we've still got to make sure that we deliver the remaining 9,000 of those houses. But we have no reporting at the moment that shows us what's coming through the pipeline. What price brackets are they falling into? There's no way for you guys, if you've got challenges with new designs and new innovations and new products, and I hear great examples every single day, but I also hear people saying they get blocked with regulatory and compliance things. I hear that delays in consenting are actually increasing, that code of compliance at the end can be 3 months plus. I hear that we talk a lot about building strong partnerships between the public and private sector, but we haven't addressed procurement rules. I hear examples where people have done great stuff. There's been 2 companies this week have spoken to me who have done a lot of work on modular, affordable housing, but they have given up and they're going back to traditional building because they can't get any traction with it. We've got issues around capability and capacity of the construction industry, and we've got challenges around funding. So and many more issues. The problem at the moment is we know there's nowhere for us to go to solve it. So I come back to the initiative again, because I believe that the only way we can solve Auckland's housing crisis is we've got to get past the talking and the aspirational targets. We've got to have an absolute resolute focus on delivery. We've got to build sectors that actually trust each other, that we have totally transparent reporting KPIs and targets, and a commitment to unblocking some of the problems. And I just want to finish and remind you again that I've got absolutely no doubt that if we put this collective impact solution into Auckland today, in 10 years' time, we will look back to today and it will seem just as obvious a decision to make as I'm sure you are sitting here today thinking that realestate.co.nz was an obvious decision. Thank you.
Thanks, Leonie. I definitely appreciated your talk. I think what we've just heard is very much a real-world 2018 Auckland presentation. The issues that we're all dealing with right now. As you were reeling off that list, I just found myself getting increasingly frustrated. I said, yes, is it? And perhaps slightly saddened to hear that you've been talking to someone who's working in modular, prefab, done all the heavy lifting, all the hard yards, and still can't get it off the ground. I mean, that's one of the solutions that we're all looking at. I'm sure many of in the room here are dipping their toe in, seeing it as one of the answers to the problem.